Welcome back to Heavy Wireless Podcast, part of the Pack of Pushers Podcast Network. My name is Keith Parsons, and today I'm with Rowell Dionicio. Roel, how are you doing today?
Hey, Keith, I'm doing well. Thank you for having me here.
We brought you on to talk about starting a Wi-Fi consulting practice. I thought of lots of people in our industry who do it, and you've done a fantastic job, and you've been very open to the public and tell people about how it goes. So I thought you could share your experience. So maybe we way back up to the very beginning. You had a full-time job and enjoyed your job, and you decided to also add some Wi-Fi consulting.
Yeah, I actually still have that full-time job. So I still have a full-time employer. And around the same time I went to this employer, started consulting. And I did it because I had just left a managed service provider. And from there, I felt that Wi-Fi was such a, there weren't a lot of people that knew Wi-Fi. They just knew how to put up access points and turn them on, but they didn't really know how to configure it. And during my stint there at the MSP, that managed service provider, I even learned I was doing it wrong. So eventually I got my certifications and then focused on the consulting side on just Wi-Fi. So I really niched it down and said, hey, I'm going to do Wi-Fi. I'm going to write a lot about doing Wi-Fi for enterprise space, for warehouses. And then eventually it drew in some business that way.
So you also blog, you also have a podcast, Clarity Sand Podcast. It's how many, 100 plus episodes?
Yeah, I think we're mid 300s about now, somewhere around there. I don't even keep track anymore. Once you start, you know how this goes. Once you start making episodes, you're just making them, cracking them out. It's still more like a hobby for me and my co-host Francois, but we learn that way. We learn Wi-Fi by making these podcast episodes, and then also it becomes a marketing tool for us as well, because people learn about these episodes and they listen and they either decide that, hey, I can do this myself, or I can reach out to me or Francois for help.
Did you do that on purpose, thinking that was going to be part of your marketing for your consulting practice?
No, and we actually don't advertise our businesses that much on the podcast. I think once people learn about us, they know that we do consulting. And then for me, it's just more consulting on the side. But I think it just kind of transformed that way, because our primary focus was to learn and educate other people about Wi-Fi. So our audience is mainly engineers or people who are trying to get into Wi-Fi. So it's not necessarily targeted towards like managers or buyers or people trying to find consultants to work with.
Well, it worked very well for you. It's a very popular and great podcast. And I do like your show notes are kind of bloggish along with each one. So you contain data in the show notes, which helps.
Yeah.
Well, let's focus on your consulting practice. What did you do to start? I mean, that very, very first thing when you're, maybe talking with your spouse and you go, I think I want to do this. How did you get started?
Yeah, there's the business aspect of it, which is formalizing your business. And I'm in California, so there's a lot of hoops I got to jump through. But in terms of finding your first client, usually the first client is the hardest one. And then after that, I would say your third or fifth client would be even harder, because it's easy to get kind of the second and third, just in my opinion. But the way that I really got started was blogging a lot. So a lot of the good things that came my way happened to be from blogging and making videos. I don't do it as much today, but I'm trying to get back into it. But earlier, I would attribute a lot of some of the successes I had was from writing, and so I would write for the targeted person I was trying to reach. So either an IT manager or a systems administrator or a network engineer that just didn't know Wi-Fi. So I would write very specific topics that targeted questions that they might have. And then I would combine that with SEO or search engine optimization. And at the time I was in the Bay Area, Northern California. So I would target companies in the Bay Area just based on like what they would search for on Google.
And how'd that work out for you?
I remember getting the first client, which was a warehouse in Southern California, and that was kind of like the biggest one I had at that time. Like I was even surprised like how big they were, and they decided to meet up with me. I actually met on site. I didn't even charge them for that visit. I just wanted to, try to win the sale. So I did it based on trying to be as resourceful as I can. So I met up with them and took a tour. They were talking to me, and for those who are getting started, what you want to do is let them do most of the talking, and don't oversell by taking over the conversation. Let them describe what their problems are, what their challenges are. Take note of what those could be, and then near the end, you could discuss how you could fix all of those challenges. So you want to be a listener from that standpoint, so you could understand what they're trying to solve.
And did you, on that first visit, know the solution? I mean, they obviously had a problem. They talked through it, and you already, did you have the solution in mind as they were talking?
I did, because walking through it at that time, I had already gotten, I think, my CWNA, a few of the CWNP certifications. So I knew what I was looking at, what some of their problems were with handheld scanners. They would mention things like roaming and going from between racks to inside of a refrigerator, things like that. And I could see what the problems were. And obviously they didn't have a design. So someone just kind of put access points wherever they needed. And we ended up doing a full design for them. And that actually worked out very well.
And so that first sale, did it scare you, or did it give you reason to move on?
It didn't scare me. When I move on certain things, I have a very certain level of confidence in what I'm doing. I think a lot of that led up, the way that led up to that point was I was in a lot of situations with the managed service provider where I was kind of hesitant and scared because of things I didn't know, or I didn't know how to approach it. But I had really good managers there, so I learned a lot from how to handle certain things, how to handle stress, how to handle maybe some uncertainty. So I worked a lot on my soft skills, and also just having the confidence and knowing that I could do what I'm about to do. And of course, like you make some errors along the way, but you try to learn from those, right? So there are certain situations where I have a client, and then maybe they didn't like working with me, and I don't hear from them again. And so I learn from those. I will try to get feedback from certain people. I'm not afraid to ask for feedback either. I'll just say, like, I'll send surveys to clients and be like, how would you rate me as an engineer who came out to do the work, and just get feedback that way. But I will reflect on some of the projects that I do and go, all right, what went right? What went wrong? How can I change that? What do I need to do differently? Or, what was I doing even on my personal life that kind of led to either a success or failure for that project?
So when you first started, were you on that warehouse project? Did you sell the gear to go in along, or were you just selling services?
I think I sold the gear as well. So around that time, I knew I also wanted to resell network equipment. And so the first one I did was to be a partner with Cisco, but more on the Meraki side. That one was kind of a challenge too, because being like a one-person business, I don't think these vendors like that, or they don't put any preference towards you, right? You're smaller. Plus you got to build up that clout with the distributor and the vendor, so that way you could actually sell additional hardware, because there's like a certain cap they put you at. So if I at that time had I just started and I tried to sell something like $500,000 worth of equipment, they probably would be like, can you do that? Can your business do that? Are you able to handle it? And so there's things like that where on the business side, it all comes down to like how you invoice. When are you going to get paid for that invoice? When can you pay the distributor? Like there's all sorts of things that I learned along the way that I didn't even know how to deal with. But I when I work with other people, I always tell them like ask questions. So if I'm talking to the distributor, like I ask them what people would consider dumb questions, but I don't consider them dumb because I would be dumb if I didn't get paid and I was then on the hook for equipment, like so
Oh,
I wanted to be sure I knew what was going to happen after, 7 days, 30 days, whatever.
I I have a really scary, bad story from when I first got started many, many decades ago. I had bid on a project that I saw a PO came out for a university. They wanted printers. And I happened to be with the distributor who sold the printers, selling,
Yeah.
I think I was selling telephone gear at the time. But this printer thing came up, and I admittedly didn't know anything about anything and thought I was like king of the world because I won the bid for 100
Yeah.
printers. And so I went and had a truck, and I went to the distributor and picked up 100 printers, took them, delivered them to the customer, took the invoice into the customer, and stood there. And the customer's like, and I'm like, well, you're going to pay me? And they're like, no, this was net 30. And I had no idea what net 30 meant. And I'm standing there with this invoice that I thought I was pretty good because I actually made an invoice in Excel, and it looked kind of like normal. And the guy goes, I'll pay you. Is this address correct? Yeah. And everything's right. And then I'm standing there, and he's just like, well, I'll pay you. And he had said net 30 like 3 times. And finally I did your stupid question and said, what does net 30 mean? And he explained it to me. And then I'm like, I think I was going to cry. And I might have actually cried in front of him. And he's like, what's wrong? And I went, well, I wrote a hot check at the distributor because I just thought I was going to pick them up, deliver them, and have a check. And it was Friday afternoon, so I'd have time before Monday to deposit it.
Yeah.
And he just looks at me and he's like, we don't even cut checks till next Thursday.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking I'm going to jail because I didn't ask that question. So if you don't know terms net 30, when are you going to get paid? Who gets paid? And distributors
Even
will
worse, net 60 or net 90.
yeah, and sometimes when they say net 30, they don't really mean net 30.
They don't. Yeah, I'm dealing with that now. And you'll, as someone who's consulting, you'll always run into this. You'll send your invoice. It's net 30. They haven't paid within 30 days. They're late. So you gotta hound them. So you gotta account for all this time that you're not going to get paid for, right? So the whole trying to email them, call them, say, hey, what's the status? Is it going to come in via check? Are you going to give me ACH? Like, what is it? So I deal with that all the time. It happens. People pay late, but that's when I've learned to like add late fees. So I'll say, hey, just so you know, if you don't pay on time, I want to avoid having to add a late fee on your invoice. And then they start jumping. They're like, oh, late fee? Okay, well, I don't want to pay that. And sometimes I do pay it. Like, it depends on the company. Some companies don't care. Like they have so much money, they don't care about paying.
I remember the first time. Have you ever run across someone who has a 210 net 30?
No.
It's if they pay within 10 days, they automatically get a 2% discount.
Oh yeah, I would not accept that.
So a 210 net 30 sounds good, but then they pay right away. But then they just take 2% off. Like, well, I didn't approve that, and then they come back and tell you, well, it was right there at the bottom of the invoice. Yeah,
you got to read everything, right? So depending on the size of the company, some of them, they'll have their own terms, and then other companies they'll just accept your invoice and pay it. So
yeah, and some people pay that same day. It happens. So it's just one of those things you have to know about. So you moved on. You had your first one, second and third customers come along. What did you do to get that fourth and fifth customer?
Yeah, at that point, you actually need to start reaching out to your network, and this is where networking, not the technical piece, but networking and talking with other people and creating relationships, and actually caring about people really starts to help, right? So once you start, say, like on LinkedIn, you start telling people that you do this work, then people start to remember you. So as long as you keep up to date with like your blog and you post stuff on LinkedIn, you always want to be top of mind with people. So if they constantly see your stuff, they'll remember you, right? And you always want to be on topic. So with me, I was always posting Wi-Fi stuff, Wi-Fi related stuff, anything that I could get out of whatever clients I already had. So I could, if I can turn one into a testimonial, take pictures, videos, and use that, I will use it and post it. And then eventually someone will come around saying, hey, I have this client or I have an issue. Would you be able to help? And so that's a lot of my clients come in to through the website or as a referral. So there's not much actually sales where I'm calling out try to develop a pipeline. And I probably should, but being that I'm small, I just don't.
Yeah, I don't know if that's financially feasible when you're little, because a salesperson needs a commission and they need to have an income. And as the owner of the business, you're thinking, well, if I got a guy to go sales, I'll get more sales. And that's probably true, but there's an expense there that, might not be covered. Yeah.
Yeah. It's an upfront expense. And in IT, that sales cycle, like how long you're going to get a client, it tends to be very long. So either like 6 months or even longer for especially big deals where you're talking a large amount of money that a company is going to spend. They're not just going to go, yeah, sure, we'll spend money with you. And then also there's the whole there's I've run into clients where they just hate onboarding new vendors. So there's that challenge as well. So it's a whole bureaucratic process on trying to add me into their system so I could get paid. So sometimes it's easier to go underneath another company that's already in. And so you're technically being subcontracted to do something very specific. So there's like a lot of ways to get a client, and usually you want to leverage your network. And this is where I tell people, like, you always want to be kind, you always want to be positive, share good things, because it's you that's ultimately the salesperson, right? I'm a salesperson whether I like it or not. I have to sell myself. I have to sell the business. People are going to look you up. They're going to want to say, hey, do I want to do business with this person or this company? So that's kind of the perception you got to put out there and kind of be genuine there as well.
Where did you go learn about the mechanics and the pieces that have to move for the business side of it?
I read a lot of books. So I have a bookshelf on this side. I have a lot of business books. I have a lot of sales books, how to say things certain ways in order to try to get certain sales. I take free webinars. So California has free webinars on tax stuff. So rather than having to go look for a book that teaches you how to deal with taxes, I just get that straight from the government that I give tax money to. So that's where you can ask a lot of questions. There's a lot of free resources out there. There's the Small Business Administration. They're helpful as well. So a lot of things are available online. There's people that I talk to, other business people that I talk to, just to get ideas for like how to do things in the business. So for me right now, it's about processes. So I talk a lot with Francois about processes we should have in place on a business. So that way, if we bring on a subcontractor or an employee, like there's already process in place that they could follow or they would know or understand how you do business with other clients. So lots of reading, lots of books, audiobooks as well, because I do drive up to the Bay Area quite a bit. So I can knock out at least 2 audiobooks on the way there and on the way back.
Well, it sounds like this takes a lot of energy.
It does.
It does. So if you were going to define, if someone's sitting back thinking, I want to be a Wi-Fi consultant, what would the personality traits be that you would recommend you need to have in order to, I mean, we just talked about energy, but in addition to that, what would someone need if they want to look inside themselves and say, I think I'm ready for this?
Yeah. If anyone follows me, I take a slow process to things. I'm very methodical. I like to think things through. So I always like to learn I do just in time learning. So if I know I'm going to need a certain skill, I will go and learn it as much as I can just for that that specific task. So you have to know how to calculate risk. There's a certain level of risk that you're going to take as a consultant, and you have to be able to determine that what you're comfortable with, what you're comfortable losing. So how much time you want to lose if that this doesn't pan out, or how you're going to invoice. There's things like soft skills. Soft skills, I think, are the most important piece because as an engineer, we're engineers. We know how to talk technically. But a lot of times when you're trying to make a sale, you're talking to a decision maker, a manager, someone who's going to write the check, right? It could be a CFO. So you need to speak their language as well. And that means you have to speak intelligently about that. And even if you don't know, you want to maybe sound confidently wrong rather than questionably wrong. Like, I think I'm going to do it this way, or I think you should do it this way. Like, you just want to be confident in how you do things. And if you want it, that's just what you have to want, right? So it's a lot of communication skills, how you write emails, how you communicate with people, how much transparency you want to provide. I provide a lot of transparency with my clients, and they actually love me for that. And I think that's just how I attract the right clients. I've had clients that they didn't communicate properly, or they didn't work to like how I would do business. And so I would just cut them off. I'd just be like, I'm going to cancel this agreement. You've already paid me like 50%, and I feel like I've done 50% of the work. We're going to just cut our ties there. And sometimes that even means if it's a small invoice, like let's say I had one client where they were super late. I would say like 3 months late, and I only added a 1% late fee. And I said, hey, just pay this 1% late fee. We're done. And all they did was just pay the invoice and skip the late fee. And so, and that was because when I do work with new clients, I actually request 50% upfront to do the work before I do anything. And that depends like on the person I'm working with. If I feel like their accounting process is good, I might let that slide. But this client just didn't pay. And then they ended up paying the invoice, but not the late fee. And so I said, hey, I'm just going to cancel the agreement because I think your processes are like, they're not aligned with like how I process things. It doesn't make sense. I feel like you guys don't do business properly. And so they came back with, are you really going to cancel this agreement over $24? And I said, yeah, because it's my process. Like, I'm not going to skip the process and then have you do it again on the other 50%. So like, there's a way you have to stand by your principles running a business and then also show that to other clients. Like, you can't just put up this fake wall or perception and then not really be about that, right? So I think it all just comes back to like running the business you think you should run and attracting the right clients. Because I don't just take on any client as well. Like and I'll have initial calls. I'll try to figure out like, hey, what's it like at this business? Do I feel like they'll pay me if I do work with them? So there's a lot to it. It's not just about making money.
So what would the personality traits be of a good consultant? If someone is thinking for themselves,
Mm-hmm.
I'm ready to do this, what would you recommend that they have it before they start?
Yeah, you've got to be open-minded and not be very close-minded. I think engineers tend to be close-minded in the way they think. You've got to have like excellent communication skills. You've got to have empathy as well, because when you're dealing with maybe a manager, you don't know like what they're dealing with inside of their company. There's probably other aspects to it that you don't know. Um, you've got to be on your ball. So planning is like a big thing for me. So being able to think 4 or 5 steps ahead of what might happen. So I do a lot of planning and I do a lot of documentation as well. So like documenting things that happen. What I have with meetings, if someone says something verbally, I like write it down, because then they won't send it to you via email, and then they'll say like, "Oh, I never said that," or "I never agreed to that." So basically, also looking out for yourself.
Little CYA. Well, Roel, thank you very much for sharing your time. If you were going to do this all over again,
Mm-hmm.
would you do anything different?
I think I would probably do more sales. Uh, I don't like cold calling, but I've the first time I did it, I ended up getting a sale, and I haven't gotten a sale since. But I think there's a certain like I get scared doing it, just calling someone and being declined, or hung up on. But I think I would have maybe a little bit more success that way, and I think it does work. It's just like a certain way to approach it that does work. But the other thing I would do differently is delegate tasks to other people as early as possible, because at this point in time, like you'll get super busy, especially if you've got a full-time job. Like it's incredibly hard to do everything and your full-time job. So if you can offload accounting, for example, do that. If you need specialized engineering, go do that. Get Try to bring someone on and have a network of people that you could trust and work with occasionally.
Well, thanks for your time again, Roel. This has been another episode of Heavy Wireless, part of the Packet Pushers Packet Podcast Network. And we're glad that you listened to this episode, and stay tuned for further episodes in the future. Thank you.